Good morning. We have a wonderful panel waiting for you, and they're going to introduce themselves, and in doing so, also share with you a little personal story, a little bit of their history of how they arrived where they are today. Professor Muhammad is apparently going to be a little bit late, so we'll have her join us as soon as she arrives. And so if our panelists could introduce themselves when they begin their story and tell us a little bit about your personal journey, how you arrived where you are today.
Thank you, Kathleen. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. I'm Ann Mulder. I'm the interim president here at Grand Rapids Community College. Most people never have any idea what the president looks like or who he or she may be. Well, here I am. You can go home and tell your mom today and your dad that you saw the president. Indeed, this story that I'm going to tell you could be your grandmother's story, because my career began really, I am probably a contemporary with most of your grandmothers in the room. I look out and I see you, and I realize that my granddaughter is in a classroom not unlike this one now at this point in time. My career here in higher education began, interestingly enough, at Grand Rapids Community College, where I was first an adjunct professor in the School of Education, and then later became the first director of student activities, the job that Eric Mullen has now. You know Eric, don't you? Some of you in student activities know him at least. That was my job, followed then by a long career again in the teaching profession, and then I became a dean at the institution. And following the experience of serving as a dean in several capacities here at the college, I moved to become the president of Lake Michigan College, another one of Michigan's 29 community colleges that is located in the St. Joe Benton Harbor area. Following that career, and by the way, in this very quick synopsis that I'm giving you, some 26, almost 30 years had elapsed. I left my career after 10 years as president at Lake Michigan College to retire, I thought, for the first time, where I went to Florida. I'm the first adult in our family. All the children were already in Florida. You know what Florida usually is. You send your grandparents there. They call it God's waiting room, I think. You send your grandparents there. Well, I was the first. My children went before I did. They had flourishing careers there, and their husbands had flourishing careers there. But they moved on into Florida, and I went to be with them so that I could interfere in every phase of their life and in every phase of my granddaughter's life and my grandson's life, and I've succeeded in doing that. And while I was there, I taught for one of the universities in the Graduate School of Education. Sometime after that, I was invited back to Grand Rapids to serve as the interim dean of the School of Education at Grand Valley, a position I held for a couple of years. Then went back home again to retire once more, and was called last year to come back and serve as the interim president of Grand Rapids Community College. Now, that's a very quick synopsis of 73 years of life. But let me just tell you a couple of lessons that were significant to me along the way, and I know we'll have questions as we come along. I was reared by a single mother. My mother had been widowed when she was 36 years of age. And when I think of the most influential person in my life, I have to think about my mother, because she taught me and believed deeply, since she was the first woman in her family educated beyond high school, that education was the most important thing that she could have. She had a career as a nurse. In the days that my mother was growing up, and that was in the 30s, actually, when her career began, there were few careers for women. They were essentially, you could be a nurse, you could be a social worker, you could be a secretary, you could be a teacher. And she chose to become a nurse. And when she was widowed at 36, she, with an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 16-month-old, she knew that it was her education that would enable us to survive. And she valued the education to the point that she always said it was as important for her daughters to be educated as it was for her son. And that was her mantra. And there was not an option. We went to school. That was it. I think that's a very valuable thing because it taught me early on the significance and the importance of credentialing. That's another story perhaps we can come back to at a later point in time. Because for me, I not only learned that it was important for me to have that education, to support myself, to be able to do whatever it was that I needed to do without support of anyone else other than myself, and that again was my mother's background, but to know that the credentialing would also enable me to earn the kinds of degrees that I needed to get to be whatever it was that I wanted to be. I don't think that we are always born knowing what it is we want to be. If I were to ask you right now, what is it that you want to do, please do not be embarrassed if you can't say, I don't have the answer just yet. I didn't have that answer either. My mother, however, was a very directive woman. She called me my junior year in college and she said, what do you plan to do next year? This was my answer. Well, I don't want to go to law school because I would be the only woman in the University of Kentucky School of Law. And that was true at that time. And even though my uncle had offered to pay my way through school, I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And Mother, I don't want to be an FBI agent because they won't take women. And at that point, they did not take women. You see how the world has opened up? But I'll tell you what I'd like to do, Mom. I'd like to be an interpreter at the United Nations. And there was a silence on the phone. And she said, I would like to remind you that you do not speak another language. Right away, it was a touch of realism, you see, because she said, you're going to stay in school, you're going to get a teaching degree, because you're not coming home next year. Oh, can you imagine being told you can't come home, that you actually have to go to work? That could happen. I chose the teaching career. Or rather, it chose me. I don't know. But falling in love with my profession was also something early on that made a difference in my life, because I found that this was a field that I truly loved, because in teaching, I transformed lives. And so that teaching piece became absolutely instrumental in my DNA, if you will, because I knew that always I had to be in a profession where I could make that kind of difference in the lives of the people that I touched. And so that was an important lesson as well, that I had to have the degree, the credentialing became important, and that I had to absolutely love what it is that I did. Now, there's some other stories along the way, but I think it would be fair to have Hilda and Cynthia talk with you about some of their stories, and then we'll have the discussion where I would imagine the brunt of this would be uncovered. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have nothing to say. Really? It's so hard to follow her.
Oh, no.
Anywhere. And at the same time, it's such a pleasure to have the opportunity to serve with her. I'm Hilda Hailey. I am Vice President for Student and Academic Affairs here at GRCC. I came here a year and a half ago. I am from Puerto Rico. I came here because I couldn't take the weather there anymore. And it was just too hard. I said, no, I need a change.
I want to be cold.
Yeah, and it has been great. I mean, I love it. I love the snow, I love the cold, I love the wind. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Okay, that's it. I was Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Dean of Academic Affairs in both public and private institutions in Puerto Rico. Like Anne, I think I owe everything that I have to my parents. Neither of my parents finished any higher education degree. My mom studied secretarial sciences when she was in high school. My dad went to he was a Marine, and he came back and he became a salesman for Procter & Gamble. They have 4 kids, and they made sure all of us finished some sort of degree. And there's a difference between the 4 of us. I am the youngest of 4 and the only girl in the family. So I felt that I had that extra burden, and they put me through school. I came to school to the United States for all of my degrees, for my bachelor's, for my PhD, and they sent me to Spain for my master's degree. I thought I was going to be a teacher. And that was my profession of choice. I became an administrator by accident. and that is how I got here. I share with Anne her enthusiasm for what you do. Even if it's by an accident, you have to love what you do, whatever it is. And I think I'll let Cynthia go on. So.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Springer. I am the Vice President for Organizational Development here at GRCC. And I am your Generation X panel member, and I have 25 years of experience in the field that I currently work in, starting with having attended Davenport University. I have an associate's degree in legal studies there. Also have my bachelor's degree from Davenport University, and I have my master's degree in organizational development. One of the unique things about my background that allows me to sit today with 25 years of experience is, as I was attending school at Davenport University in my sophomore year, my inspiration came to be my son, who is 22 years old. I had my son when I was 19 years old, and that truly motivated me to certainly get out and work. And during the time that I was working, I actually landed a position in the legal community in my profession. And so it allowed me to really gain the relevant skills and experience that I needed so that my career really took off pretty quickly at that point. I went from working in private practice with 2 different law firms here in the community to a corporate law office at Amway Corporation. After spending about 10 years at Amway, I came over here to GRCC as their Director of Labor Relations. And so over the time of acquiring experience, I will share with you that those 2 things couple together, not just your academic experience, but also any work experience that you can acquire will be the right combination so that when you are ready to apply for a position or seek job opportunities, you're much more marketable to organizations in that. And so my son, who is currently a student at Texas A&M University, he will be finishing his 5th year study at Texas A&M University, is much like myself, very focused, very driven. It only took him 5 years to complete those 2 programs. He has his bachelor's degree in kinesiology, and he will have his master's degree in physical science as well. So this is a young man who probably, much like his mom, was quite motivated to pursue education, acquire the right experiences, and do that in a way so that his future would be brighter. So what I would like to just share with you is that in practicing your craft, it is so important to get the education, as the other ladies have spoken to, but also to work experience that go along with it as well. And that's my background.
Well, thank you very much. Is this okay, or am I too close? Yeah. You all right? I'm all right? Okay. One of the things I noticed, and when listening to the 3 of you, is there's lots of different ways to reach where you are today. In Cynthia's case, it sounds as if it was pretty planned. Like you knew where you were going, and in Hilda's case, you used the word accident, which I assume also means, though, that you had the relevant skills and experiences to make that accident happen.
Or somebody thought I did.
Or someone thought you did.
Yeah.
And with Anne, it was a not unpredictable path, but not one that you would have picked out when you wanted to be an interpreter at the UN.
And that's right. Well, but I also think about my career along the way. I'm not sure that it was a planned piece either. For some reason, I was teaching at Union High School when one of the deans here at the college called and he said, "I hear you're a really good teacher. Would you like to come down and teach evening college classes at the community college?" And I said, yes, that sounds like a wonderful thing. And then later, we need to do something for students at this college. Would you consider becoming their first director of student activities? Mine was not as planned. I always said that doors opened, and I chose to walk through them. And I think that's an important thing, is that sometimes when those doors opened, I had wished that the others had not closed behind me, but I opted to go through the open door, because I really truly believe that sometimes when you plan this and things don't go according to plan, there's a reason for that. 6 months later, you're going to discover this other new door that is opened, and you're going to be able to walk through it. So for me, that was the piece of that. It gave me the opportunity along the way to do all the things I knew I had to do. I have my bachelor's, my master's, my doctorate. I got all of the prerequisite degrees, but even that was not always planned out as perfectly as I thought it might be. You take in the 60s and later in the 80s, it was unusual to see that older woman student coming back pursuing that master's, pursuing that doctorate. But I did it, and the doors opened. I'd continued to let them open for me. So it wasn't as planned, but it happened. It was deliberate. It was more deliberate, but not necessarily planned out.
And in your case, then, you also mentioned, sort of building on what Hilda said, that there was someone who said, "You're a great teacher. You should go teach in the evening." So there was someone who believed in you and saw your skills. So sometimes it wasn't that you had the plan, but someone else saw something in you.
Well, how many of you know the term mentor? You hear the term mentor all the time. Do you know where that term came from, by the way? Do any of you have any idea? Your Latin or experience? Okay, I'll give you a little piece of history here.
She took Latin.
I took Latin, yes. It's called the dead language. I mean, nobody takes Latin anymore, right? Mentor. How many of you have ever heard of Odysseus? You've read the Odyssey, etc. Well, Odysseus had a son named Telemachus, and when he left to go on the long journey, the Odyssey, it's called the Odyssey. When he went on the long journey, he went to his trusted friend, mentor, and said, "Please take care of my son," essentially. "Teach my son the things that he needs to know to become a man." So remember that little story about the word mentor. That comes from that great Greek saga that we usually have read, or we used to have to read those kinds of things. But the mentor story is very important because it came to be synonymous with that individual who helps you along the way. Now, if you think, you can probably think of someone who has been very helpful to you apart from your family. I had several mentors along the way. I also had what I call, who taught me. They taught me the things that I needed to know to be more successful, to be more inquisitive, to be more determined about my life. I also had sponsors along the way. These were people who said, "You'd be good at that, Ann. Try this, do that. I'm going to make an avenue for you. There will be a place for you at the college to do this." And little by little, I acquired some skills along the way. The skills like Cynthia talked about that you needed for that credentialing piece. So mentor, sponsor, those were both important.
And there are not a lot of them.
No, they're not.
Unfortunately, it's not like some people decide, okay, I'm going to be a mentor today, and then go off and try to mentor people. That doesn't happen. Usually it's more like Anne explained, something that kind of comes along, and it's so much more there's so much more pressure on the part of the mentee than the mentor. I'm pretty sure no one said, "I'm going to be your mentor."
No, they did not.
You really actually had to pick up things from them, and they probably didn't even know.
No, they had no idea that they'd made that kind of contribution. You probably had some like that, didn't you?
I sure did. My mentor actually was a man that I worked for back early in my career. I think I might have been 19, 20 years old, and much like a sponge, didn't actually request to be my mentor. I certainly didn't ask for him to be my mentor, but he was quite instrumental in providing me with experiences that I could absorb and I could use in what I was doing there at the law firm, but also that grew me as an individual. It could be simple things like, I'm going to go to the pen club tonight, and I've got this group of people that I'm going to be entertaining. I want you to come along. I'm thinking, what do I wear? I'm 19 years old and, didn't have that kind of a wardrobe. But I did. I took those risks. I went along with them and certainly took advantage of all those opportunities to connect with some of the other people in his world that I would obviously have to work with in my time as growing in my profession. But they were very intentional about saying, I want to give you this experience. I want to ask you if you'd be willing to step outside your comfort zone instead of ordering a hamburger tonight, would you order a steak, or would you order, some fish, so that you can, really, grow in who you are as an individual. And so you have to take risks, and I do think it's important that if you are not asked by someone to be their mentee, that you find someone that you can ask and that you trust and that you're willing to, share who you are, so that they can help you become more of what you are seeking to be as well.
And that, can I just add something to that? One of the things, when I became active in the field of higher education, there was a man here who was the dean of the college. His name was Francis McCarthy, and he kept getting feminist literature. And he, when he got the literature, he didn't know what to do with it. This was, again, back in the 60s and 70s. He wasn't quite sure what to do with this literature, so he gave it to me because I started the first program for older women returning to college as a result of this. But I began to do some work nationally with women who were in the field of community colleges all across the country. And the first conference that I ever went to for women in higher education, now there are 1,200 community colleges in this country, and there were probably at that time about 1,000 at that point. It hasn't grown too much more since then, grown in the number of students that are going to the colleges, but not necessarily in the number of institutions. Of that 1,000, there were only 22 women presidents, and 11 of them were nuns. Does that tell you something? Right there. So we decided that what we had to do as women, I became one of the founding members of a group called the American Association of Women in Community and Junior Colleges, that we had to build a network of women who had the education and the credentialing to move ahead, so that people could never say, well, there are not any women out there qualified to do the job. I am happy to tell you that has been a long journey. It's been a journey of some 30 years, that today over half of the women in community college presidencies are female. So that is something that I'm very pleased about, because it was creating an equal playing ground, and we did it with a whole program that engaged mentors in the process. You had to find your mentor and work with that, and I think that was it was an important move in the women's movement in higher ed.
And I would like to use that as a kind of a, the teacher in me. I have a test for you. Right now there are 28 community colleges in Michigan. Okay. There are 12 public universities, total of 43. How many presidents do you think we have right now in those 43s?
That are women?
Women. How many women presidents?
Oh, let's see, 1, 2.
Anybody?
A lot more than we used to.
Well, that's true.
That's probably true. Yeah. Any idea? 22.
22.
About, half, you think? Would you agree with that? Anybody think it's higher than that? More than half of the women present? Actually, there are only 12 in Michigan.
I was going to say 10.
7 in community colleges and 5 in public universities. How about the chief academic officer? There are 43. How many do you think are women?
Hilda's one.
Mm-hmm. 1, yeah. Mm-hmm. Just say any number, What do you do? 8. Lowballing it a lot, Professor Light. 18. That means 42% of the provost or chief academic officers are women. 28% of them are presidents. 42% are chief academic officers. How about chief financial officers? How many women do you think are at the financial reins of the 43 institutions?
2.
1.
I said 2. How many?
13. But there are none in the public 4-year institutions.
None.
The 13 are in community colleges. So there's no woman chief financial officer in University of Michigan, Michigan State, Central, Eastern, whatever you name them. How many deans of students do you think are women?
Deans of students.
Deans of students.
10.
30.
3?
27. That is the
27.
highest of all. You wonder why? Why is the deans of students the highest? 63% of the deans of students of those 43 institutions are. Why would you think that is? And why would you think that is?
I think that, first of all, the most important thing that you have on campus are your students. They've entrusted them to good women. That's what I'd like to think.
I agree.
And I do believe that it's the soft skills, they think. When I say they, it appears that it's the soft side, because finance is supposed to be. We still think in terms of finance as a man's world in some ways, and that students and nurturing belongs to the female side. I don't buy that. So while I know that that's what I'm thinking that people must have thought, it still exists. In truth, in higher education, the higher you go, the fewer women there have been. Which pleases me when I look at both Michigan State University and the University of Michigan. They are headed by women, which is something. And by the way, this is not negating men and the incredible contribution that they make to our field. It's the reality that there is still a glass ceiling in a lot of the educational institutions.
Do you think that's just not a consequence, though, that this happens?
Can you repeat the question, Ann?
Can you repeat the question?
He said, did I think it was just out of consequence? Was it a consequence of? I don't know, and I don't mean that as an equivocation of what it is.
Men, maybe it's just not interest.
Well, I think that women have not been counseled as much into certain areas. How many of you are how many women in this room are finance majors or are thinking about business as a career? Well, good. Now I kind of knew when I looked at you, when I saw you smiling, I thought, I bet she is. See, Cynthia, this is a more non-traditional area, if you will, that is in that organizational development area. Women have been geared into still other areas of expertise. That does not mean that we are not competent in those mathematical areas. In fact, there is some indication that we have the DNA to do that quite successfully. It's just that we have been geared into other kinds of ways. But I do think that there are enough women out there, the finance people, that that they can do that. It's just that I think that they have not been. They have not been counseled.
Following up on that, can you just tell us a little bit, each of you or anyone who'd like to speak to it, on some of the struggles that you had or issues that came up because you were a woman as you were following your career path? I mean, they say that, women who don't make waves don't make history. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything that you could tell us about the things that happened to you that were specifically, you believe, because you were a woman in your career?
I'd like to add to that, but first, in terms of your question regarding consequence, I do think that in my case, being a young mom, certainly very focused and directed, as was said earlier, was a burden for me that most men would not have to be burdened with. If a young man had a baby at 19, most likely the baby's going to be with the mom. In my case, I made the conscious decision that I was going to remain in college, which I did throughout the pregnancy, even immediately after the pregnancy. I had a very supportive mentor. The attorney I mentioned to you was very willing to support me as I took the time to, go through that period with my young baby. But I chose to come back into the workplace because I did have a supportive home system that allowed for, my child to have that daycare service provided. But if I had chose not to do that, I think I would have set my goals back a little bit. And I chose to continue to persevere with the goals that I had, as well as stay employed so that I could, make that way for my son.
But that's not easy, Cynthia.
It wasn't easy. I was going to school full-time, working full-time. But I just wanted to, in terms of consequence, there are those factors that women have to be burdened with that sometimes men don't. So, is it easier to go to a business school as opposed to, study finance? I think that's a whole nother conversation in terms of, intelligence or what have you. But, to your question regarding some of the challenges that I've faced in 25 years that I've been in my career, it has moved very quickly. I have been, exposed to a lot of political dynamics that, for the level of experience that you would assume at my age I was, confronted with. There were times, and I can tell you an example of a time when I was the only woman at the table that I would have to be at among all men. And the first appointment that I got that was significant, I had a situation maybe at the first meeting where one of the senior staff members said out loud as we were kind of settling in something like kiddo, directed to me. And I tell you, it just sent chills up my spine to think that that was going to be the dynamics of those relationships. So I chose to take a stand, and I, stopped the meeting and said, hey, I'm not kiddo. I, understand that my age and, where I'm at in my career might be a challenge to someone, but it's not a challenge to me. I've earned my credentials. I have worked hard to be where I am, and I don't want you to refer to me that way, because I certainly don't intend to do that to you in any sort of public forum. And the person who we both kind of reported to actually supported that position and said, hey, she's absolutely right. You might recall when you were that age, you were also very young, and with that, that wouldn't be an appropriate thing to say to you. So we nixed that, never had any challenges since then, and actually have a really healthy relationships, even with, and from a professional standpoint, with the individual. So I do think that there's courage that comes along with some of the responsibilities that you might take, and my dynamics are a little bit different, because being a woman is one thing, being young is another, but then being African American is also another. So there's all these factors of challenges that I can give you story after story, but it really is about your confidence as a person to get the education, because the education is going to give you the credentials to open doors. But really what gets you to walk through those doors and helps to move you along your career path is that work experience and being able to make sacrifices, because in my situation, I did give up a social life. I didn't, hang out and get the Long Island iced teas with my friends that were out hanging and doing those kind of things, because I was working and I was going to school and I was taking care of a young baby. And so those are just choices that I made, but they were great sacrifices that obviously I am very proud of today.
Welcome, Professor Muhammad. We'll let you get settled in a few minutes, and then we're going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but we'll let you settle in a minute. Anybody else want to respond to that idea of being a woman in higher ed or in the world today? I mean, there's still inequity, we know, still in this state. It varies between reports, 67 or 68% or cents on the dollar for a man's wage. So there is that financial inequity, but much like what Cynthia was speaking of, did you have, or do you have still some of those incidences?
Well, yes, you did have them along the way. I reared 2 children and was divorced during that period of time. Reared 2 children, and I think it's very difficult sometimes when women, you can have it all, but not necessarily all at the same time. One of the things that happens often with women is that there is their interrupted period of their life. There is a time in which, for me, I worked on a part-time basis. I did not work full-time at that point, but I kept my volunteer life very, very active in the community, and I was actively engaged in a lot of the things with the arts in this community. Festival. I helped to start the festival when it was a real arts festival. Now it's become a food fest, but I was here when it really was a festival of the arts. So I kept my life done with this, but I think like Cynthia, different time, different place, different scenario, but you don't have time for all of that social activity sometimes. You are pursuing the degree, you are finishing the parts, you're giving up other pieces, but there is something that motivates you to continue that journey, whatever it is, and you do it, Now, I can talk about ageism, but what I've learned about sexism, I can take it to a whole nother people. Your parents are not necessarily senile. They just may seem that way along the way. And your grandparents still have brains. Please know that. So
I guess the question that I would have is, how do you change things?
Yeah.
Because
that's a good
by
question.
accident or by design, you end up in a table where you are the only woman or one of few, or you just don't know how to play golf. and that is where
Or you don't like it.
yeah, or you don't want to, and that's where actually the business is taking place. What do you do then? Do you go and learn how to play golf and incorporate yourself, because that is a way to change things? That's a genuine approach. It's not the only one.
No.
You do have other options. You do have to take a stand. You have to take the fact that people won't like you. Well, yeah. And this is, I'm not talking only about women here. That happens to men too.
As well, yes, exactly.
Or that happened to Hispanics, or that happened to African Americans. At any point of your life, you will be a minority in a group.
At some point, everyone is.
There is often, for women, I think particularly, a moment when that has to happen, where you go from saying to yourself, I'd really like everyone to like me, because I think quite often we are still raised to be liked, where you have to say, I'm going to stand for something. And when you stand for something, it's likely
Exactly.
someone's going to disagree with you or dislike you for it.
Exactly.
That is true.
Sometimes you have to give up the need to be loved, to be really loved. And that is, that's a big lesson to learn. That one of the things I would ask is that you, as you're making that journey, that you come up with whom you are authentically, and that you authenticate your own who I am and what it is that you want to be. You don't have to be like everyone else to make it through. In fact, it is that voice of difference that creates strength in organizations. I think organizations have probably profited a great deal from having a diverse group of people, around them. I used to pray every day that I would be surrounded by people who did not think like I thought or looked like I looked, that I had this great diversity around me that could strengthen really who I was, what the college was, what my community should be about. And it's that strength and diversity, I believe, that women have understood that, that you have to be very encompassing in that approach.
Yeah. Now, I, for one, would much rather be respected than liked. Not because I'm in the human resources
love to be
field, so
loved.
I actually like people, and I like having relationships with people. But I think when it comes to the dynamics of, who I am as an individual, the level of confidence or the level of experience, it just really has to be one or the other sometimes in situations that you might be confronted with. And if I'm going to be respected, I'll, certainly sacrifice that over being liked in a situation. One of the things that I learned quite early, just because the mentor that I had really thought it was important that you be able to work in lots of different environments. I had to be able to, go to that 5-star social environment as well as my little league, baseball, game of my son. So across that spectrum, there's lots of different environments that you have to really wear multiple hats and be comfortable walking in and working in. And so that is one of the examples that I would often offer to each of you, is to put yourselves outside of your comfort zone. If you're not comfortable being around certain populations, put yourself in that situation. It only teaches you the skills that you need, because in the workplace, the dynamics of the demographics are readily shifting. By the time, many of you are really mature and full in your careers, the demographics of the baby boomers will have moved out of the workplace. And so there will be their Generation Xers and Ys, which believe differently. The loyalty of being in an employer for 30 years isn't the values that a Generation X might have. We look at the balance between our work and our family, and there means that we might change jobs every 10 years or every 7 years or what there may be. So, you're going to find yourselves in a changing environment quite often, and being able to adapt to that is such an important skill to have as you enter the workplace and use your degree for your career advancement.
I would like to say something before Mursalata, which she deserves some time. Those choices that you make, that Cynthia was talking about, do have consequences. I mean, when you decide to say something and some people is not going to like it,
Right.
that is going to have a consequence. I mean, you will spend some of your political capital doing those things.
Exactly.
And that's just it. You have to learn to live with that too.
Exactly.
So, Professor Muhammad, excuse me, we began this morning with just the panelists introducing themselves and then telling a little bit of history of how you arrived at where you are today.
Well, apparently there are people here on campus who think I should be on this panel, so they sent me an email, and I said, if you think so, I'll come up with the story to back you up on it. So, well, a little bit of my history. I think where I am today is really dependent on my family. I have 11 older brothers and sisters, and I have one younger brother. So I have 6 older sisters, and however many. I'm an English teacher, and then
Not a math.
mother, yeah,
Not a math
and then
teacher.
a lot of older brothers. But what they did for me was they made a lot of choices that weren't very good, and they told me that I shouldn't make those same choices. And because I could see the results of their choices, I believed them. I'm not a person who feels everything has to happen to me for it to be true. So I, chose things like, I think I'll just go to school today instead of not. And having that many siblings, you have a lot going on in your house. So and I chose school because it was the most quiet place. If you can imagine that, what you know about school, for school to be the most organized, quiet place in your life. So I spent as much time as I could usually at school. But my mother and my father, I think I'm probably the person I am today for both of them. My father was not a fan of women and girls. He wasn't. He really believed that, they should be seen and not heard. This was very difficult since everybody told me I was just like him. So we pretty much argued from the moment I could talk until I had my first child, is when we actually found a place to communicate. So that was a hard thing to negotiate, being just like someone who doesn't particularly think women are as smart as they are. So that was fun to negotiate from about the age of 9 to 25. But I learned a lot from him. And my mom, she was pretty much a quiet person. She would pretty much do the things that my dad, she took care of everything and as she needed to, but she would never encourage me to do the same thing. She would tell me something different, which hence me and my dad get to duke it out a lot more. So that was interesting. But I would say those are the two people. And knowing that you could be quiet and strong like my mother was, and loud and strong like my father, so you can catch me on either one of those days. With my personality, I think. But as far as, I think, being successful and being a leader, you can only lead things that you believe in. So if you find something that you believe in, that's where you're going to excel, not where other people want you to go. I attempted to do that in school, go and be a certain kind of scholar. That's where people wanted me to go, but that's not where I wanted to be. I like to teach, and that's why I was late today, because I had class. So I just have to say I learn from other people. I don't particularly like people, like when they get together in groups, but I like individuals. I like them a lot, but when you get them all together, they start doing stuff. But if you watch them, you can learn from them, and I think that's my best advice. If you want to be a leader, find something you're passionate about, even when nobody else happens to be passionate about it, and follow leaders who are passionate, and you can learn something from those individuals.
Thank you. You hear a lot about networking and the importance of networking, and I had someone tell me at least some time ago, which I thought was one of the smartest things anyone ever said to me, was networking was saying what you need out loud. And that, if people don't know what it is you need, you can't help you with it. They can't fulfill that. You talk a little bit about the networking and the impact it may have had getting you where you are today, or what's happening with you right now currently. You talked about, in fact, Anne, about staying connected to the community through volunteer work, even when you were
Yes.
not working in the community. And did that turn out to be the network that you use later?
One of the networks. I love. Someone told me the other day that if on their tombstone, she wanted to have written, "She connected the dots," which I think is, if you think about it, is really rather interesting because we talk about dots, really, and how you connect them. You remember playing that time, and then all of a sudden, up would come the pig that you had on the page or whatever it was that you were drawing when you were kids, when you'd connected the dots. I think that is really important because, to me, I was schooled as a phenomenologist in my statistical background here, and that is the study, really, of phenomenon, or ethnography, as some social scientists know, in which it's not the issue of statistics, but it's the issue of showing connections and relationships. That fascinates me as a scholar and as an academician. It also fascinates me as I think about my own life because connecting with individuals meant that I was really expanding my horizons, that I was really creating form, you see, where there appeared that there was no form. And the networking got to be very, very important to me. I have come back to this town after really 20 some odd years away from this. And it is amazing to me how I can pick up my professional life now based upon those networks from such a long time ago. Yesterday, I am out telling the story of this college to community folk, some of whom I had not seen in 25 or 30 years. And you could still pick up the college, the networks, the whole piece. Networking is really more than just finding social networks. It's understanding sociological networks that create community, create a sense of community. That's probably going off on a tangent, but it makes sense to me.
No,
Indulge me. So
And
it makes sense.
I would like to say something about that because in higher education, which is kind of the thing that is tying all of us together here today, there's this difference between the executive leadership and the legislative leadership. And this is something that Jim Collins in his work, Good to Great, and the social sectors talks about. And listening to Anne, I kind of think that precisely what we do is legislative leadership. The difference is that in the executive leadership, you are able to make a decision.
Yes, exactly.
You make a decision by yourself, and things happen. That's what corporate CEOs do in their businesses. That's what the boss and the other guy, whatever his name is, does at Amway or Altico, whatever the name is. That they can do that. In higher education, that doesn't happen. Anything you want to have done, you have to talk to a lot of people to have that happen. And even then, it's harder, to do it. So I guess that's a part of the networking that you have to be
That's
able
power.
to do.
Yeah.
It's
That's
a different
power.
kind of power.
And certainly when you sit in our positions, we do have executive leadership. We can say it and it will happen. I find that in the social sector, you can say it and they don't have to do it. They don't have to do it. But if you are able to create that, you have a stronger bond.
And that is the networking that I see mostly valuable, talking to the students, talking to the faculty, talking to the other staff to make sure things happen. It takes a long time also.
It does.
It takes a long time.
It does.
Yeah, because one of the premises of the networking is relationships. It really is about making those connections with people who are your bridges, and the more of those connections you have as you travel through the course of your career, you're going to have more bridges to cross. And so it's more important, as Hilda was saying, that we don't spend our political capital unwisely. So you have to know when you want to take a stand and when you don't want to take a stand, because those bridges are part of those relationships that can help move you along faster in some instances that you might need to call upon them later in life to allow you to advance an initiative or something that you'd like to move forward. So the dynamics are the relationships behind the networking, whether it happens on a golf course, or it happens at a restaurant, or it happens in other settings that you're not necessarily comfortable in going in, but you do because those are the connections at some point in your career. You've just laid the groundwork to be able to come back to at some point.
And I just add, because my first introduction to networking was as a graduate student, and it was horrible. And it was all about getting to know people, to get someplace, to get a job, to get something, and I was just not good at it. And being not that much of an extroverted person, I would find myself, I mean, when I was in graduate school, and you all may go on to graduate school or some kind of trainee program, and you're trying to figure out who the heck you are, and at the same time, you're trying to connect with people. And what I found is the more you can be comfortable and know who you are and be comfortable in yourself, the better it is to make those connections, and not just, oh, I know I'm going to need a job, and looking for people to make connections because you want something from them, then entering those conversations and relationships based on this is who I am and here are some of my thoughts, and not wasting your skills on just building connections with people. Because it's like I tell my daughter, these on Facebook and on MySpace, these people are not your friends. We have to talk about what actually is a friend. So all those people are not really your friends. They're not going to be able to deliver what you need when you're stranded on the side of the road.
That's right.
They're not going to be there for you. Yeah. So in creating those networks, I think sometimes for me it took a long time because I had to figure out who I am and what I wanted.
I knew you wanted to network with.
Yeah, and who do I really want to invite into my actual circle? Because I just don't want to meet people because I want something, or later they're going to want something. So, and you don't need to meet everybody because there's 6 degrees of separation. You just need to meet the people who are important for you, and then they'll help you network. They'll remember you when something comes across their desk. They'll say, oh yeah, Mursalata, I remember having this conversation with her, which was a real conversation or something.
Do you remember, do you all know the movie 6 Degrees of Separation? Do you know what that means? Do most of you know that? It's a great film. It's the whole piece that we are only separated from, say, knowing
Everybody in the world.
Everybody in the world. By 6, if we knew the 6 right people to get us to that person, then we could meet everybody in the world. So think about that. You're 6 degrees away from knowing Barack Obama. You're 6 degrees away from knowing the King of Dubai. That if you could just find
Brad Pitt.
The Brad Pitt, 6 degrees away from Brad Pitt. I like that one. I like George Clooney better, actually. And I think I'm only
Forrest
3
Whitaker,
there.
but he was here, so.
But you would be only 6 degrees away from somebody. It's kind of an intriguing thing because when you think about relationships, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. I need to find the right people to get me to that place, and that's an okay thing to think about.
Mm-hmm. I actually find that men are better at that than women are.
I don't think so.
I mean, they're on baseball teams and other teams quite young, and I think sometimes we're socialized to be one-to-one. This is my best friend, and that's my only friend that I have. Well, I think you can have lots of relationship connections and, learn from what's taught to young men as they're coming up in terms of those bonds that may be here today, moved on to another team tomorrow, or even different the next year. So I just think that is a skill that we as women also have to be very deliberate about. And so this conversation about networking is important to us because we actually have to seek out the relationships in a different level than what we're conditioned to do, because we want those relationships because Hilda's going to be my best friend for the rest of my life. But we also don't want to be down where Mursalata is, which is I only want my relationship with Hilda because she can help me get something. In between that, pendulum swinging, there's a lot of other benefits of having connections throughout, the travels that you're encountering.
But see, I think men are really good at team building.
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
not so sure that I think women are very good at relationships.
True.
I don't know.
I agree with what you're saying.
You know what
I
I'm
think
saying?
Maybe it's
See, I don't think we know as much about teaming because we have not been socialized. I came from an era in which there were not even teams that women played on.
Mm-hmm. Well, because in a team you always have a star.
A star?
There's always a star in a team. Yeah.
Well,
there's you have the center in the basketball, you have the quarterback in the other one. There's always a star. And I think women are
other one. Hockey?
do not need to be the star of a team,
No.
and I think that might be a difference. You know,
Could
we
be.
can live without being the
star.
center of the yeah. So I don't know. That's my theory.
Well, one of the questions that was asked of us, if you don't mind me jumping in on this one, had to do with changes that we've seen in our careers. At least for myself, this whole yin-yang kind of phenomena where it deals with feminine and masculinity, I have actually encountered more women that are much more, I think it's yang. What do they have?
More dominant?
More dominant than, and
yang?
then more men that are much more passive. And so it's been interesting, especially, here at Grand Rapids Community College, at least our statistics mirror a lot of what the community makeup is, meaning that we have a good balance of women and men, and I think the numbers are slightly higher for women. In leadership at GRCC, we certainly have, a slightly higher number of women in leadership roles at Grand Rapids Community College. And so as this body kind of play together well, the behavioral characteristics that you would typically expect of, one versus the other, I've actually seen a little bit of the opposite, not just here at GRCC, but just in my travels in my career. Much more women are, and maybe they're more confident, maybe they are, much more experienced with, how to, work within, certain work environments. But I think the characteristics of being more dominant is certainly rising more in my travels that I've seen with women. And I think that's a good thing, because a part of this may also have something to do with if you are out in the workplace, who's watching the children back home? There's a change in dynamics too, that men are also willing to be home with the children. And so they're providing some nurturing for the young people at home, while the women are in the workplace sort of, fighting through their career advancement.
Yeah.
A few years ago, there was a study that was done by Harvard University that dealt with some community college presidents, and I was a part of that study. They took us first through what a Myers-Briggs testing. Do you know what that is? Personality testing, in which you discover if the personality characteristics and traits that you had. And they also took us through a whole behavioral piece on who believes more in what they call the care-connected modality, and who is more justice rights modality. Now, the assumption, and then they talked about the competencies that you needed to have to succeed in your study, in your workplace. And it was a very involved set of testing that they not only did in a linear kind of way, but they came out and did extensive interviews with those of us that went through the test. It was very interesting. When it all sifted out, they had this list of competencies that they said the really excellent presidents will show these competency skills. And then they said, are they more care-connected, or are they more justice rights-oriented? I have to tell you that the 4 top presidents that they talked about, 2 were men, 2 were women on justice rights, 2 were men, 2 were women on care-connected. So there was not an appreciable piece when it was looked at in an analytical and studied kind of way. I think it's a very good study. It's an interesting study because it takes us away from the stereotypical piece of women are more care-connected and men are more concerned about justice rights. Women are more nurturing and men are less nurturing. It erased those stereotypes. I thought that was a good thing because I think it's important, and I think it's an important thing.
And there's this reality. Let me just, because it's kind of related to that. The reality is that, again, looking at higher education, you would hardly see a woman president appointed that doesn't have a PhD or an ED.
Absolutely.
But you will see men only with bachelor's degree, which is okay, it's better than having nothing, but only with a bachelor's degree being appointed president of a university. That will never happen with a woman.
That's exactly true. So it really wasn't the care-connected justice right, it's
With
that
the credentials.
credentialing piece along the way. So that's absolutely true.
Sorry.
That's
Sorry
right.
I was just going to add something just slightly different, but in thinking about the decisions that we make and how we make those decisions. I remember my dad being in a heated conversation about race issues. That's what they did, talk about race and things. There was a bunch of adults, and my father ended the conversation by saying that there are only two races. There is the race to win, and there's the human race. And you have to decide which one you're going to be in. And by making that decision, it takes it a lot out of, how do any individual, whether it be gender, race, ethnicity, happens to behave in a situation. And I thought that was, top 10 things my dad said in his life. He likes stopping conversations. But that was one of the things that did. So, and if you think about that, making that choice, you have to realize that a lot of the actions that you take in your life are going to have consequences, and you're going to have to be responsible for those consequences along the way. So I just, in an odd way, I thought that sort of connected.
Sure, absolutely.
What you're saying.
There's a great book if anybody wants to read it, Sex, Gender, and Competition. And it's a real easy read. It's not the Harvard study. It's a real easy read. But it talks a lot about what I think Hilda was alluding to as well. And it does talk a little bit about women, when they walk into a room, don't look to see who's got the whistle, who's in charge. Where men look immediately to see who's in charge, and they unconsciously or unintentionally may be thinking, how do I get the whistle? And women are thinking, how can I not get the whistle? And if I get the whistle, how often do I have to use it? So there's just lots of different things about how we might mix together. And some of it certainly is socialization. Some of it certainly does go back to teams and things that happen as we're younger. One more question from me, and then we're going to go.
Okay.
Question over here.
Yeah, I didn't really understand what you're saying, like that analogy your dad had of
Human race.
human race and then a race to win. What's the difference?
Well, what I understood from that, because the conversation at the time was all over the board about people and how, in this country, blacks and different groups of people have been treated and mistreated. And he's saying, well, if your eye happens to be on winning and being the first to gain something, then it doesn't make a difference. You're not going to see people as human beings. You're going to be in a race to attain something, to get something. So all of that individual, it makes sense that we can then treat each other the way we have in history. That makes a lot of sense if you are in a race to win, to be on top. However, if you see yourself as part of the human race, then you're going to think twice for how you treat each other.
Just one last question up here, and then we'll turn it completely over to the audience. And it just is, it's in 2009, and a variety of time within your careers in the panel. Is there anything that still surprises you that women are still facing that you would have thought wouldn't be faced in 2009?
Wage parity.
Wage parity.
I think that's, recently there was signed into law this Lilly Ledbetter Act, and took this woman, almost her entire life to fight for what she considered to be equal wages to her counterparts. And all the law does is allows her to make that claim not at a time in which she was assigned a wage, but at a time in which she believed that the wage was discriminatory. So I just think that those kinds of legislation coming in 2009 really still surprises me. And I do think that, certainly if you look across Fortune 500 companies and across organizations, you'll still find wage disparity between men and women in same careers and professions. And it could be a lot to do with, women have to work harder, they've got to get more credentials, they've got to have more experience, they've got to just really be sharp to get the same position that someone, as Hilda was saying, might just have a bachelor's degree and someone they met on the golf course that opened that door for them. So I think that, some of those issues for me are still very surprising in 2009.
And sad.
And that I would have thought we'd been further along, but very happy to see the changes in laws that are moving toward the voice of women to be able to speak out, because that was part of the concern is, the loophole of if you didn't make the claim when you first got assigned the wage, then you really don't have a claim because the statute of limitation has, far passed. Versus maybe you don't make the claim because you feel intimidated by who you might make the claim against. So some of those issues are now being set aside so that if you have a concern, you can actually bring that forward. And it actually has put employers on notice that maybe you got to go back and look at your pay practices. And maybe you need to take the action to determine if they are equitable to women and men or having a disparate impact. And you make those changes so that you don't find yourself in a court case awarding someone millions of dollars when you could just do things right on the front end.
The only thing that still surprises me is that my mom still thinks that I'm going to serve my husband food. That hasn't changed. I've been married 15 years. I have never done it. And we still, when we go there, which now we don't too often, he said, are you going to serve Steve? Am I going to start today? No, of course not. So that's the only thing that actually surprised me.
There are things like that will always be a shock, because I have a husband who cooks far better than I do, and that's a good thing, That's a good thing. But the
Start a
pay
checklist.
the
That's
pay
a good
issue, I think, is still a bit of a surprise. And let me just say this: I still hope for the day when a woman will be elected president of this country. I don't see that happening anytime soon, and I still think that there are issues surrounding women in politics that I find, even though there are more women in the Senate, more elected officials, I am still surprised by the fact that the great debate that took place in our last political campaign, and by the way, I like our new president. I love him. I still think that there was a great deal of isms that occurred in that particular election that I found hurtful and disturbing. And so that I am not surprised by anything. I'm too old to be really surprised, but I am still not above feeling the sadness.
I'm going to say that understanding that parents include men and women and things, and I think many of our workplaces have a long way to go to understand, for example, why a man might need to take maternity leave.
We've awarded them here.
I'm not saying us. I'm talking about our society at large. We do not treat men and women the same way as, and we can go a lot further with understanding the importance of parenting and the importance of supporting that. And I mean, it makes it difficult, even if you do have individuals who have worked out, well, my husband's going to stay at home. That's still not, I think,
He has a more difficult time sometimes.
So I think we have,
society.
I'm not surprised by it. I'm just tired by it more so.
Tired.
Yeah.
We should be really accepting of that. If a man wants to stay home and a woman works, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I heard a story about a CEO who had a board meeting the morning his daughter showed up at his house to bring the baby because she had to be somewhere that was quite critical and important and needed him to watch her baby for her. And he was, can't do this, and what are you doing? And Dad, I need you. And of course she won over, and he had to call into the office to tell his board that he couldn't be there, and it changed the dynamics of that entire organization. Coming back to work the next day, realizing that his role in helping out and fulfilling that responsibility for his daughter really changed the workplace practices for that organization. And so I think the systemic changes that organizations need do sometimes take the personality of who's there. And so it's sometimes very important that the diversity of people at the top allow for those voices to be heard so that the practices get to shift away from maybe some traditional practices that sometimes guide what happens on a regular basis.
I think sometimes you have to be willing to break the rules.
Yep.
I'll tell this story. When I was a dean here at this college, women were not permitted maternity leave of any kind. And we had a very fine member of the faculty who asked if she could take her sick days for maternity leave, and that was frowned upon here. So I was the dean she called every morning and reported sick to. And I remember the president said to me, "Has she had that baby?" And I said, "Gosh, gee, I don't know. She sounded really sick to me." And so that was a terrible thing to do, right? But they changed the laws. And sometimes you have to be willing to break the rules, and I'm not asking for revolution, by the way. Shape up. Don't you dare break a rule today while I'm on campus, okay? But you see, sometimes when rules are crazy, you have to be willing, and when systems are crazy like they are with things here, you have to be willing to challenge them. And say, just a minute, this system is not right. There is some disparity here that I think we need to discuss. So you have to be really willing to challenge the system. And sometimes you might break the rule. It's not going to hurt anybody, something like that.
We're going to open up to the audience, and one of the things that we will do is repeat your question because it's being recorded, so it's not as if we didn't hear you or whatever. But so if the panelists decide to answer a question that you hear, if you'd repeat it, that would be helpful for the recording. So, any questions?
Not everybody at once.
Yes.
We were talking about how men and women may be different, and like women are better at relationships and that sort of thing. Men are better at team building. Do you find in your work with young people that is changing as well? Because more girls are getting involved with team sports,
I do.
softball, and that sort of thing.
I
Do you
do.
find that changing the nature of the coming workforce?
I do. I personally think that, I'm saying it from a grandmother's point of view right now. I see my granddaughter actively engaged in understanding team building in lots of ways because and sports, I believe, has done that for her, has enabled her to really be better at that kind of thing. I see, and yes, I think that's going to change the nature of many things here. Teaming is a part of what we need to learn as organizations in a collaborative kinds of natures. I think those are skills that we are all working on and trying to perfect as we move into this 21st century. So yeah, I think that's different. I think it's encouraged now in a way.
And I think the other thing that's impacting it is the generational shifts that are going to occur regardless if we want them to or not. So you're going to see less traditional traditionalists and baby boomers in the workplace. And the workplace is going to be shaped by dynamics that are set by their generation X and Ys and so forth. And I think that the values that each of those generations represent are going to evolve to be more accepting because I think the other generations are much more about the whole as opposed to the individual.
And I was going to agree, yes, because having children, a teenager and a preteen, having two girls into sports, I know for me it, I think, provides an opportunity to see parts of their characteristics that I would not have seen before had they not chosen to be involved in these sort of team sports. It would have just not showed up, or I think shown up in a very different way. So I think that it's being part of those extracurricular or team, particularly sports for girls, helps them develop parts of their personalities that may not have been developed before.
May I just ask a question? How many of the women in the room here participated in some sort of sports initiatives when you were in high school or something? See, the great majority of you, you did this. That's interesting. That's good.
Sir.
We kind of agreed upon like that, athletics kind of brings out that team building aspect. I guess we kind of associated that to men. What do you think is associated to that relationship specialization? You kind of agreed that women possess more.
Women have babies. It's the nurturing kind of thing that I think that we think not every woman has children, to be sure, but that piece of the nurturing that is so identified with, I think, mothering, those kinds of pieces. I do believe that is the nature of that part of nurturing piece.
And I also think the toys that you play with, you
Yeah,
know,
girls are
going
given
to
the
play
dolls.
with dolls that encourage sort of the relationship-oriented play, and men may, have bats and things that are individually.
And I have no idea, since I was just like my dad.
But I do think that is I was not the I was a little bit non-traditional in that regard too. Even a long time ago, it was that. But there were expectations in my generation. Girls. I grew after my father died. We went back to the Kentucky farm. Women in our household did not go to the field and work alongside the men. That was forbidden. Women did women's work inside the house. Men did men's work. And it was very clearly defined, and that's how it was. And so I think that was a socialization process, which is different now.
And it's also, I think,
He's not
possible if we were
finished.
talking to coaches, we might see too that there's a different, just athletics alone and just forming teams women's teams and men's teams are not identical either in how they operate. So I think if we had coaches here who would coach both men and women, they would be able to speak a little bit to that as well. To this, there's still differences even present when you have the concept of team. Did you have another follow-up?
Yeah, and I can also vouch for that. I help coach a team right here on campus. So do you think, like, but back to what we were saying, do you think like the stay-at-home dad would kind of improve that relationship aspect?
I think the people should be free to do whatever it is they need or want to do. And I don't think we need to pass judgments on men who make that as an option. If that is the option, I think it's between two individuals. Who stays home, the man or the woman, or do you share the child? How do you want to do it? I'm saddened by a society that will say that a man is diminished because he wants to stay home. And I think that they sometimes are looked at that way, and I don't think that's right.
And that's why I was trying to make the focus on parenting, because like my husband and I, we both have always worked, which means somebody's got to take care of the kids, which means you need a really good relationship for both of those parents to be, if parenting, taking care of those, if nurturing is going to be the focus of two people who have to work, how are you going to work that out to make it important? And I think we did a good job, because to this day, our children can look at us and say mom or dad. That's when we knew we did it, because they'll say mom and dad, and it'll make a difference which one's there. So
I just think young people starting out need to determine with each other how it is they want that to be. In many cases now, it takes two people to make the income for survival. So how do we share all the pieces of that in a true partnership? It's hard. It's hard. We don't live in a society where we have the luxury one or the other. Sometimes you're going to have both of you working.
Because I can see if you have a situation where somebody can stay home, man or woman, they might be arm wrestling over that one. Like, hey, I don't want to have to go out there. You go.
But it does, it will play out, one, because it'll get more attention, whether it's through media or through conversations at the boardroom or what have you. And those conversations is what's needed to create systemic change in terms of practices in the workplace. So I just think the idea that when you have someone who can be your spokesperson, and that spokesperson is a man who says, I do it and I'm very good at it. I, for one, my husband is a widow and raised 2 children on his own. I think the support that he needs, I can provide, but also he needs support in the workplace as well. So I just think the idea of raising the awareness around the changes and the shifts of those dynamics is what we need in the community.
Okay, we'll take 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll have a summation, and then you
Is
can
it
go to the
just us?
reception if you'd like.
It's down to 2. Let's see. No. Good. There's a young man.
You said, Cynthia, about the generations, the X and Y generation. What description do you have for X and Y? Like, what characteristics do they have?
I think Kathleen can answer that one. Characteristics of X and Y.
I always hear awful things about my generation.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, and actually, I think on our website we might have some more detailed description. I am Generation X. I am probably one who will balance work and family, as opposed to stay in a job from 1 year to when I retire. The Ys are going to be much more attached to their parents. There are, I remember an example when my son was in a program and his department chair, I needed to communicate at his request something to the department chair. I got the most scathing email back from the faculty member, nothing against faculty member, putting me on check because what are you doing in his business? What are you, advocating for him? That's his job, that type of thing. But I just think that those kinds of independence, the factors of independence for our Generation Y are got to be their responsibility more so than their parents' responsibility. So those are things that I know about them.
why do you think they lack that?
It may be because parents are much more able to be involved in their children's day-to-day lives. There is some fulfillment that I do get out of knowing what's going on with my son. I signed up for Bebo, or just because I wanted to know what he was doing. When he left home, it was great because the rule was when you got to be 18, you were either going to go to college or get a job, and that was the encouragement to keep him focused and motivation. But after he left, I still wanted to keep him attached to me and know what was going on. And so I think parenting for me me has a lot to do with why I'm still involved with him in some ways. You know, when he was at Texas A&M University, and he's an athlete there. He played basketball for the university, and they wrote an article about him. He was a spotlight athlete for Corpus Christi, and the title of the article just surprised me. It said "Mama's Boy."
It didn't surprise me a bit.
It did me because I didn't want to accept that, but it said "Mama's Boy," and it talked a lot about the things he accomplished and the great athlete that he contributed to Corpus Christi. But that was the title of all the things that he talked about in terms of his influences. It was Mama. In terms of his, success, it was Mama. So the guy just obviously connected to that. And
Cynthia, you're a good mom.
I
watched you with your other two children. You're a good mom.
But thank you.
But don't get lost by thinking that you have to fall into any of those categories. You don't.
Yeah, they're overlaps.
My generation, which is so old that none of you would remember anyway, was called, was it the lost generation? I don't know now. The silent generation. Mine was called the silent generation. I like to remind people that the first people who walked on the moon were from my generation. So I don't see that as so silent. I see that as being a really significant and important generation who did make a difference in this country. So don't buy into all the stereotypes that society will give to you.
Yeah.
There's
I
that
agree
one
with
and that
that.
one. There's a,
I was wondering if you think that a lot of the differences that still exist between men and women today have to do with the fact that at 18 men still have to set up a draft while
yeah.
Can you repeat that before you answer?
I heard you say, do we think that the issue that men have to sign up for the draft and that women don't at 18 has something to do with the disparities? I think it talks about our social contract that we seem to have here, that men have to go off to war and that women cannot. And there are countries that do not do that. There are countries where public service, where other kinds of things become a mantra at 18, and ours it's not that way. But yeah, I think there are probably some differences. Personally, what I would like to see, and this is just a crazy old lady, I think that many people who graduate from college do not know what it is that they want to do. And I wonder what it would be like if we were to say that every person, once they graduated from college or hit a certain age, had 2 years of service, whether it was in community service or whatever. I look at so much of what needs to happen in this country right now, given the economic piece of it, and I wonder, couldn't we be out there doing some volunteer work at this juncture in our lives to create, to deal with the public parks that aren't working, to deal with forestry trails that need to be redone. I mean, I just think there's a whole series of things we might think about as people that could inspire a whole sense of volunteerism or service learning that would extend beyond the high school experience. That's just my idea. I have a grandson and a granddaughter, both of whom I think would benefit from that.
Thank you so much. But I thank all of the panel that's left. And also, I think Professor Abid is going to maybe remind some of you who are here from class to make sure that you get your name signed in the right place and acknowledge that you're here, and tell us about the reception that's going to be held. But thank you very much for contributing today.
Thank you. I do think it's a good thing. I love it.